Greetings and welcome to Loquitur RPG. With the new 2024 handbook coming out for Dungeons & Dragons, I've decided I'm going to do some character builds. Like a lot of other content creators, but I will try to do things a little bit differently, perhaps inspire things in a little bit different way, give you guys some more things to think about. This is just going to be the explanation of the concepts and how I'm going to do my guides. So please remember, as we get started, hit that like button. It really does help me. It helps the channel. And if you want to see more stuff like this in the future, it'll help inspire me to do more. So the idea behind my builds is going to be that for new players, I want things to be clear, what their role is in the party, what they do in combat. We're going to explain some gameplay in a way that should make these characters easy to pilot, and it won't take 7 minutes to figure out what you're supposed to do on your turn. For experienced players, these ideas, I may have a different way of looking at things than other content creators, so it may inspire you to change or do something differently with a build of your own. And for role players, I would say a lot of role players don't want to watch guides because they say, well, you know, I want to role play the character. I'm not going to min-max. I don't need this. I don't want that. But my response to that is there's no reason to role play on a bad frame. So you could role play any character at all. You might as well role play a character that's built for the game that won't drag down your party or cause them to be hindered in a meaningless way just because you want to role play a wizard with no intelligence. I don't support that, but I will talk about role play with these characters, and we'll try to give role players a good frame to build from. And for everyone, we're going to make sure that this stuff is 2024 compatible, that it's backwards compatible. We'll talk about the differences where that's appropriate. The playtest materials are published through Unearthed Arcana. We've seen already some of the materials coming out through content creators that have early access to the handbook, so we know kind of what these things are going to look like. And I feel that in 2024 version, the character building is much, much improved. Even if you just look at the generation feats, the level 1 feats, they come without a stat bonus. Originally, when I looked at those, there were a couple that stood out to me, and I thought, man, this is the illusion of choice. Everybody's going to take these same feats. But after playing around with it and looking at some character builds, I think the origin feats and the way they've got it set up really allows for a variety. Every single one of those feats is going to be good for a certain character build. Toughness is going to be good for some characters, magic initiate for others, skill, getting 3 skills on a character at the start. Rather than think of that for like a rogue character, I always think of it more for a wizard character or a paladin, where you're pretty starved for skills based on your class itself. So getting 3 extra skills that you can pick from the whole list is really going to be beneficial for some characters. So I think we'll use all of these different origin feats. I think that's good. The races seemed more balanced. I feel like there's a few standout races too, but I feel like they're all viable again. So I feel like character building really brings back the options. You can do a lot of different things with character building now, and it feels pretty fair. So to differentiate myself from the other content creators, I think I'm going to do 2 things. First, I'm going to rate my character builds, not necessarily based on a score or how much damage they do, but more conceptually, how are they suited for different areas of gameplay. And I'll get into exactly what that's going to look like, and I'm going to provide a chart with each character that kind of lays out what I think this character's skills and abilities are going to direct it to in the game. With that in mind, I'll give an expected rating for that result. And if you disagree with that, it's fine. It's just meant as kind of a guideline, what I'm intending the character to do. I'm going to put examples of the gameplay in for around level 2 or 3. A lot of times I'm going to multi-class with these builds, so within a couple levels, they'll have 1 level of 1 class and then go into something else. So once we get a couple levels on the character, some campaigns start at level 3, so I feel like giving an idea of how these characters play at level 2 or 3 is pretty adequate for a starting idea of how the character works. And then usually by level 5 to 7, there's like extra attack for fighting characters, critical spell levels for casters are going to be achieved. So somewhere in that level 5 to 7 range, we'll do sort of a layout of the gameplay again. And then finally around level 10 to 13, if it's applicable. I am going to try to use a rule set that's going to build fair characters. And I want to show how the characters will fit into a party. So if things work out according to plan, I'm going to do these characters in groups. I may do a couple characters at first just to establish the idea, but then we'll start doing characters in groups of like 3 or 4, and that'll be the 4 members of a party. I'll explain the party, I'll go into each character, and then we'll do their roles, and that'll be like, 5 or 6 different videos, one for each of the characters, and then a video to tie it all together and show how they work as a team. And for people who are new to Dungeons & Dragons, maybe this is something that'll help and help them learn how to build a good party, and they can build those characters, and if they don't like it, they can restart with different characters or whatever. But I think that's kind of lacking in what I've seen out there is sort of building a good party that you could expect to succeed in the game. In terms of character building, there's some things I want to establish. It's not hard to win Dungeons & Dragons. If you build characters absolutely for optimized damage or gameplay to run a gauntlet, that's one thing. But there's a lot more aspects of the game than just running hard combats. And generally, any party that goes into the game is going to, quote, win. It's also not hard to lose. I mean, if the GM really wants to kill a party or a character, they can. That's all within the rules, and it's not hard to do. But I would say at the end of the day, it's a game of imagination. And your character, by the time you get to 8th or 9th level, your character is more a collection of the stories of what went well and what went horribly in combat and out of combat, and when you got captured and taken prisoner by those orcs that one time. And those kinds of things are what build up the character of your character. So I think it's important to remember that we're not trying to win the game, we're not trying to beat the GM, and the GM, we shouldn't put ourselves in a situation where the GM is trying to beat us, where we keep springing these little surprise things. Oh, my character also does this, and then the GM feels obligated to put your character in its place. So let's avoid that. We're going to build interesting, powerful characters, but we're going to include that character as an idea, element of the character building. Optimized builds sometimes suffer from the other aspects of the game. So you can maximize your damage, or use the example of an invincible tank, right? You build this tank that almost can't be hit in combat, that is going to save every saving throw, and you run that character out and move it into combat with a fire giant, and you say, okay, fire giant, you're pinned down now. And the fire giant just walks away, just says, you know what, buddy, I've had enough of you, and just walks away. There are some feats that you could take in the game to try to stop that, but sometimes these tanks have been so focused on tanking that they don't have a meaningful attack of opportunity. They didn't take Sentinel like they should have, something like that. The DM just ignores your character and just walks away from you. That can feel pretty frustrating, so we're going to avoid making one-dimensional characters. Half the game is combat, but that still leaves another half of the game to explore, to disable traps, to steal things from people, to sneak in somewhere, to have social encounters. All of that stuff is also part of the game. So we're going to want every character to have some impact in combat, but also some impact in the rest of the game. If we do smaller groups like 3 or 4 players, there needs to be synergy among the group. Any GM can play around any group of players. If you all want to play Rangers, if there's 4 Rangers, the GM can make adventures that will be okay, and you'll have 4 Rangers and you'll have fun. But if you're playing a module, something that's pre-established, a lot of times those are built with, let's say, a combat with a bunch of little guys to see if you got any area effect damage. It could have traps that need to be disabled or disarmed, or at least makes the module easier if you can disarm those traps. So you need a variety of skills and abilities if you want to do preset modules, and that's kind of what we're going to go for. Efficiency in my style of build, we're not going to maximize damage or maximize tanking. We're going to go for a character that does really well at one of those roles, but has a broader skill set. Multi-classing is going to be necessary, and in 2024 Handbook, of course, it's going to require level 3 for any of the subclasses, so we're always going to follow that rule going forward. Even if we dip back into the 2014 content for a class that we want to bring in, we're still going to follow those rules. I'll be looking for ideas to make characters that are viable in combat, effective out of combat, and in terms of performance, we're going to do 3 kind of separate things: combat, exploration, and social scenarios, and we're going to have numbers for each of those. So in perspective, let's say, for instance, you want to do an Arcanist, Arcanist, whatever you want to call that class. It should be backward compatible, but we're going to do that. If we build a build that uses that, we're going to do it in a way where we pay attention to the 2024 rules and we backfill with the 2014 rules in a way that's fair going forward. I also want to have a theme in the context of how the new abilities are written. I've sensed that there's this idea that characters get a big hit once per round. A lot of the stuff, when you look at it, once per round of combat, you can smite because now it's a bonus action. If you use Hex, at least the way I've seen it worded, you get that on one of your attacks in a turn. So there's going to be a lot less of, trying to get 32 attacks in a round to maximize your damage. And there's going to be a lot more of making sure that whatever your big hit for the round is, hits and lands and does that damage. I like a skill and rule. If the combination is too cheesy or doesn't, I feel like, meet the intent or rules or spirit of the game, then I'm not going to use it in builds. We're not going to build a whole group that's based on dragging people through spike growth. While I think spike growth is okay on its own, I think an entire party that's built around it, that's completely optimized to drag things through spikes. Any GM who's faced with that kind of group should put the characters in combat where spike growth isn't reasonable. Put them in an underwater combat or make it in an area where the spikes reasonably couldn't be grown and the whole party, the viability of the party goes way down. So I don't like those kinds of things where it's too much all in on something that seems like a gimmick. No bag of holding within a bag of holding to nuke the world. And infinite rope tricks where you have a familiar drop down the rope, climb down it, come back up, all that stuff, just so you can abuse certain spells. We're not going to do that. Simulacrum is garbage. Even the new version of Simulacrum, looks like it didn't solve the Simulacrum wish loop, so that's just out. We're not going to do it. Things like grappling, flying up in the air and then dropping somebody. If you can generate a fly speed, grapple them successfully, fly them up in the air and drop them, I think that's all within the rules. I don't think that's too cheesy. However, running between their legs and diving down and blasting them up in the air with Eldritch Blast because it says it gets pushed directly away from you and up could be a direction directly away from you. If I was the DM in that scenario, that monster would go up. But then it would come down and it would land on you with an equal force and you would take just as much damage as it did going up in the air. So, again, the DM can deal with this, but we're just not going to put it in. There's some other things like I said, as we go along, I'll talk about those kinds of things. Overpowered spells and skills, I'm just going to leave things like Silvery Barb, Shadow Blade, Twilight Cleric, Simulacrum out of the builds. And the controversial or cheesy strategies, talk over with your GM. I'll maybe refer to those in some builds. And of course, custom lineage and variant human are just out now. If you want a second feat, you get a second origin feat with human, and that's what you can do. I think it's fair. I think, like I said, the character building has been equalized a lot. So in terms of talking about optimized versus efficient, let's say an optimized build for wizards, you're not going to multi-class. Especially you're not going to multi-class into a class that doesn't have a spell level for you. So when you're a 7th level wizard, you want to hit 4th level spells, you want to be able to polymorph something. If you'd multi-classed, you'd lost a spell level, you wouldn't have polymorph at 7th level. And people feel like modules in the games are designed around that. I beg to differ. I feel for an efficient character, taking one level of fighter in the new rules is going to be so powerful that most 7th level wizards are actually going to be 1 level fighter, 6 level wizard. You give up a spell level, but it's so efficient. You get access to heavy armor, you can wear a shield, you can have Constitution as one of your trained saving throws, proficiency in Constitution save, which is going to help with your concentration as a wizard. There's so much that you get from that 1 level of fighter. It's not optimal to take that 1 level of fighter, but it is very efficient in terms of gameplay. If you're a level 2 wizard and you get ambushed by a bugbear that jumps out behind you and starts hitting you, if that monster crits you, you are probably dead in one hit as a wizard. If you took a level of fighter and a level of wizard, and it jumps out and attacks you, and you're wearing chainmail and a shield, just basic stuff from the start of the game, the bugbear may not even hit you, or if it does, you have that fighter starting class hit points pool to help keep you from getting one shot. So all throughout the game, then that's going to follow you, and you've got that at every level forever. You can also do the same thing with rogue. Let's say your party builds one good tank, and they've got a cleric, and they've got a person that wants to play maybe some kind of wizard in the background, stuff like that. And you also wanted to play a wizard. Well, 2 wizards, a cleric, and a paladin, for example, or a fighter, nobody's really picking up the rogue skills. But if you want to be a wizard, you could also take 1 level of rogue. You could take a starting level in rogue. That 1 level in rogue gets you skills, it gets you expertise, you get thieves' tools, you can sneak, scout, spy, unlock things. As a wizard, then you'll get message, your cantrips can start enhancing your ability to scout. It's really efficient, and you would have a rogue in the party. For 1 level of rogue, you could go wizard forever after. And there's plenty of builds that capitalize on the sneak attack for wizards later on. You could do a blade singer build, you could do a lot of stuff, and take further advantage of this rogue level. So sacrificing 1 level is not optimal. It's not going to give you the absolute most that you could get out of your character at a given level, but it's very efficient for the party that you could cover, 2 complete roles. So with that in mind, my character builds are going to be designed for interaction with the whole game, to fit into a small group. And honestly, some of these are going to be where, if you're a good gamer, you're going to be able to carry more than your fair share in a group of other people who may not be pulling their weight entirely. So for scoring these characters, here's the roles that we're going to give them. Just straight up damage. How do they do damage? Support. Support is going to include the idea of buffing other characters, Bless being one of the most impactful spells in the game. Healing, we all know that healing isn't that great in the game, but certainly we want healing word or something that can pick up a fallen party member. That's huge in support, or stop the damage from getting worse. Things that can identify, maintain concentration, all different kinds of things. Those are all going to fall into the support concept. If you're helping your party or gaining information from your party in combat, for your party in combat, that is support. Control, tanking, the ability to take hits is going to go into control, because at the end of the day, if you polymorph a creature and make it so that it can attack, that's a form of control. If you just stand in front of it with a 26 armor class and it can't hit you, that's another form of control. I think it comes down to the same thing. You're controlling where the monster attacks and trying to reduce the damage that it deals. Those kinds of things are all going to go into control. And of course, your typical debuffs like Bane or Slow Spell, Web, things like that. They're all control, counter spells, banishment. Exploration, I'm going to separate this into 2 different categories. One is exploring and one is solving. And if you think about the basic idea of going into a room, investigating it, and then disabling a trap, unless your rogue happens to have really high intelligence, which most rogues put some score in intelligence, but oftentimes your wizard is going to be better at solving, investigating, using knowledge checks, the history of something. They're going to be better at solving those intellectual puzzles than a rogue will. And then a rogue is going to be better at solving, disabling a trap, opening a lock, things like that. So there's different elements of solving. There's and to me, that's different than exploration. Exploration is where you're sneaking in somewhere. You're trying to get behind enemy lines. It's where you've gone ahead of the party and you're trying to scout and get information ahead of the group. Perception, stealth, those kinds of things are important for exploration. So I see those as 2 completely different roles. Social interaction, I'm just going to put that all into one category, social and role play, and that's typically charisma-based stuff. But persuasion, leadership, deception, and just regular having a character that will role play in those situations. So to take a look at this scoring, let's take a look at 3 different kinds of paladins. One is we're going to build a paladin with 2 levels of paladin, 5 levels of hexblade, and a bunch of bard levels. Now, one of the highest damage builds that I've ever seen in the game is kind of like this. It also includes assassin rogue, so that you can get surprised the first round, use a shadow blade, drop all your high level spells on smites, and do upwards of 1,000 damage. I think we've all probably seen those builds. It's crazy. But anyway, let's build that character. Let's say we're looking at that kind of character with paladin, hexblade, bard levels, and we're planning to counterspell things, drop smites. Maybe we're carrying a polearm for damage, or a shadow blade or something like that. The second one we'll look at is more of a support paladin, where we've taken at least 6 levels so that we can have the aura and give people the extra bonus to saves. We're going to go into Divine Soul Sorcerer and be more of a sorcerer than a paladin. That's going to give us access to cleric spells through Divine Soul, as well as sorcerer spells. We'll eventually be able to cast a fireball, counterspell, revive people, all kinds of things. Last, we'll look at a wisdom paladin, where we take... we're going to eventually go to Paladin 8, but we're going to take some Paladin levels, take some Cleric levels, take Paladin levels, take Cleric levels. We're going to go back and forth. We're going to take Peace so that we can actually have a double up on the ability to bless. So Peace Clerics have this ability that is basically a second version of Bless that you can use. We'll have Healing Word, we'll have Import, in combat support. And we'll have out of combat, we'll have massive perception. We'll be able to get wisdom on this character, get high perception. We don't have to go all in on heavy armor for this character. We could potentially use a breastplate and have stealth. So there's some, and especially again with the ability to get skilled. Maybe already at first level we took skilled, we got stealth abilities, we made ourselves into a character that can be at the front, help with perception. And be a point person. So in terms of how that graph looks, for that first optimized character, the damage is going to be 10 out of 10. In a round where we want to drop all of our optimized damage and optimized smites, and in the new 2024 guide, we can't do all of those multiple smites like we could before, but we could, for several rounds in a row, drop our highest level smite as a bonus action, turn that into extra damage, and just chew away at our enemies with all this. I still think it's going to be one of the highest damage characters that you can build, and maybe it's even like 1 level of Paladin and then Warlock forever. Hexblade necessarily isn't a thing in 2024 rulebook, but I think add 1 level of Paladin to Warlock and you may have one of the most damaging base builds in the game. So the damage is 10. And it has a little bit of support in combat. The out-of-combat stuff is pretty low. They do have charisma, so they've got some pretty good social skills. So we would give them a decent rating. You can see we gave them a 6 in the social skills, a 5 in support, and then a 10 in combat. The problem with this build is, after a couple rounds of combat, you may see that damage drop way off. Your ability to put smites on everything may fall off. And maybe those Warlock levels are good enough and they keep you going. But some of these characters that are built for huge burst damage, once they need sustainable damage, it's really a lot lower. So that's something to keep in mind, what the optimized character looks like when it's not using all of its resources. The support paladin, here we're going to trade off that, that sorcerer paladin build. We're going to trade off some of our damage for additional support and control. The support, we're going to get revives, we're going to get bless, we're going to get paladins have bless, but we could bless it, potentially upcast it and get more people involved in that bless. And in control, we get cleric spells that could help with control later on. So we give up some damage to increase the amount of support and control. And we're still not that great at scouting and exploring, or solving and exploring. And potentially even better now with these sorcerer spells, and maybe get some charm effects in here, but maybe even better at the social interactions. The Wisdom Paladin, again, we could tweak this Paladin to actually be part of the vanguard, part of the front, and head out. We could have some knowledge skills that are good, some survival and healing things that are good. We could have stealth, and spread that out through the character. Now we've given up even more damage here. for more support. A little bit less control than the sorcerer version, but the bars have come up across the board. And it's not to say that any one of these builds is necessarily better than another. I'm just saying that a paladin with a high wisdom, you could have strength, wisdom, and charisma pretty well balanced and keep them all reasonably high. And have a character that's good at all aspects of the game if you wanted to do that. And that's the difference between optimizing just for damage or trying to do a different build where you're respecting all the areas of the game and building the character a little different, knowing that you're giving up damage. So that's the whole point, and that's what those graphs will be meant to represent with characters that I build. In summary, I'll be presenting characters, talking about how their roles interact as a team. We'll be having a character that can fill a combat role, but also out of combat roles. And with role playing, you can imagine whatever you want. We're gonna add a role playing element to the character builds to try to give them a little bit of a personality. Every character is going to have a name, I think. At least that's my intention. So we'll build them as a character and kind of give them some background. And then just to say that doing this in a way where we have a well-rounded team, it gives your GM the freedom to use modules and pre-built content and not have to worry about whether or not you have any of those skills in the party. So we're going to address the key elements of gameplay with each group. We're going to make sure that key concentration spells are present. Again, things like Bless, Bane, Fairy Fire, those have a huge impact on the game if you have them when you need them. So we're going to try to make sure that those are present in most of our parties. Single target damage dealers, when you build a group, if you don't build one or two characters in that group that have really high single target damage, then things go the other way. Combat takes too long. And even though you might have a lot of healing and support, the need to use that healing and support for 15 rounds of combat is not going to be as effective as getting that combat over in 7 rounds, because you can get concentrated single target damage. So we will always have at least one dedicated damage dealer and at least one other damage dealer that can split between single targets or area of effect. We're going to try to make sure that we always have at least one source of area effect damage. The moment where you walk into a room that has 15 skeletons in it, or you're fighting a particular character that keeps summoning like level 1 garbage on top of you, you want to be able to drop your area of effect spells. Spirit Guardians for clerics, fireballs for wizards, things like that go boom and get rid of a lot of monsters at once. And then we'll try to have a gimmick for each team to give it a personality. So for example, we could build a team of 4. We could have a wizard, a cleric, a fighter, and then maybe a rogue, some type of character like that, ranger, something. And then we've got all of these roles filled. And the gimmick for that team might be we're all going to be very difficult to charm. So we're going to build characters in a way where we get some feat, some skill, some ability as we go along that's going to allow us to break the charm effect or be very difficult to charm in the first place, or in some cases just be outright immune to fear or charm effects. And that's going to be the gimmick for the team. So we're going to do what we're going to do, but we're also going to be very hard to charm. Maybe another team that I know I'm going to build is if you've got that one person in your group who wants to be the superhero. Most people get turned off by that, and they're like, you're hogging the spotlight. I don't want to play with you. The other way that you can play that is if there's one person in your group that really wants to be that superhero type character, you can play into it. You can play one superhero character with 3 other characters to support them. A cleric to give them freedom of movement, another class that can cast Bless, and then a wizard to cast Haste. And you just take that person who wants to be the hero, and you just let them be the hero. Why not? So that'll be the gimmick for the team. How to play a group of characters where you can let that guy that wants to be the superhero, just let him do it. Again, the idea, the concept is we'll build the character at level 1. We'll go through all the character building. And then we'll go level 2 or 3, some gameplay tips. Then we'll build them up to level 5 to 8, somewhere in there. Gameplay, we'll talk about some items at that mid-game level, and then 12 to 14 if it's relevant with some gameplay and items. And we'll have all the discussions about the backwards compatibility. So items depend on your DM, and the DM is a storyteller, so how many items you get or what you get out of the game is going to greatly depend, and sometimes those, if they roll randomly for loot, sometimes you're going to get good stuff, sometimes bad stuff, and sometimes successes and failures can define the game, not only in terms of your combats and role-playing, but also in terms of what items you get. Some items, I've got an idea in my head that I've talked to people about before. Is basically there's 3 different kinds of GMs. A Kingmaker GM kind of wants everybody to be a hero, and they just give you whatever you want. A Miser GM will make you work till level 7 to get your first true magical weapon, a +1, and anything that you get in the game is a quest. Those kinds of games can be very rewarding. I know some people don't like to play like that, but some GMs like to keep the power level way down so that the CRs for the monsters in the games fit, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff. And it can be a very rewarding style of gameplay. You just got to know who your GM is. A judge is kind of the person who's in between, and they sort of play very strictly by the rules. Sometimes they give the players some leeway, sometimes they give the monster some advantages, but a judge tries to make sure that everything's fair, that nothing's overpowered. So you kind of have the 3 styles of GMs. So regardless of what your GM is, I will, throw out some items to say, work with your GM. Maybe you could get this, or a version of it. Maybe they get a lower powered version of it. You say you want a Belt of Giant Strength, maybe they'll give you the lowest level of Belt of Giant Strength, not the highest one. But so there's some things like that we'll talk about, and I'll present 1 or 2 items in the game that I think should be like the first few things that you look for, things that could really help the character. We'll also, like I said, we'll go through some role play stuff, and I'll try to give it some spark there. And that's just for me because I have fun with it. So if you don't like that part of the build, you can skip over it when I get there. If there's a backward compatibility issue that we know about, we'll talk about that and discuss how it should be solved. And if there's options for other skills or roles, we can branch off there. And then just a couple things that didn't fit into the presentation, but I think are also going to be sort of guidelines for my build, boundary conditions. Even melee characters, no matter how good they are at melee, I'm almost always going to want to build some ranged capability into those characters. If I build a paladin, oftentimes I'll give the paladin a bunch of dexterity, even though they're not dexterous and they're probably using heavy armor and they won't take advantage of that on their AC. They still need to be able to pull out a bow and shoot something. If they take a warlock level, they can get a cantrip, Eldritch Blast, something like that they can use at range. But melee attackers have to have something they can do at range, or it feels sometimes like you're completely useless in the game. Constitution is generally a main stat. We do have access now to the toughness feat, so we won't have to go all in as much on Constitution as we did in the past. But just in general, low hit point characters are way too susceptible to getting one-shotted, so we're always going to have some stuff in Constitution. Weapon Mastery is so good now. Most caster builds are going to have a level of Fighter or a level of Paladin. I dare to say that every... clerics probably don't need this, but even if you're a Bard, you might want to take a 1 level of Paladin and then Bard from there on out. It's just so good to have access to these weapon masteries. There's ranged masteries as well as close combat, so you could have a Bard, take a level of Paladin. You'll have to sacrifice some stats for strength that you wouldn't normally have to sacrifice, but then you could give that character a bow and use bow masteries, and I think it's just too powerful. These base classes now are too powerful, and Paladin gets a spell level at spell level 1, so you don't even drop. You don't get, obviously, a Bard or Sorcerer or Warlock. You don't get their spell level at level 1. But you still get a Paladin level, so your spell level will translate. I think it's too good. I think everybody's going to be doing that. And then just to say, again, something I couldn't find a place to put in here elsewhere, I value movement very highly, and you're often going to see in these builds that I'll take mobile feat, for example, in the old rules was one of my favorite feats. It did a couple things. It was subtle, but it gave 10 feet of movement, allowed you to ignore difficult terrain, and if you attacked an enemy, you could disengage from them without needing to use the disengage action. And if you're a melee character and you get locked down by a character and you really want to be in the back fighting the wizard, the ability to just stab that character, walk away, not have to take any consequences, and go get on the wizard, that to me is so much more important. If you gave me the option with a character build, from here on out, you could add an extra d6 of damage to one of your attacks every round, or you could get an extra 10 foot of movement. Even if it was an extra 5 foot of movement, I would take that movement every time. Because for a melee character to be effective, you have to be on your target, and movement is just so critical to getting on your target. So a lot of my builds, we're going to do weird things just to get more movement. But I believe strongly in that. Well, that's going to wrap up my concept for how I'm going to build characters. Leave a like on the way out if you didn't leave one on the way in. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this in the future, if you want to see more of my character builds. And of course, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you in the next one.